like a list of positives, a list of I'm not going to say negatives, things that ultimately need some tweaking. Really, that's the way I'd put it. But overall, as far as like what, and I know that you don't really ever struggle with this now, but it's always worth reiterating for other guys. But your tonality and your level of calmness is always so visible. I can see that you're not don't seem totally phased by what I'm asking you or anything like that, and everything is pretty calm. So I don't feel like I can just railroad you in different parts of the conversation, right? I felt like there was some level of calmness. You could control the conversation, so that was really good. Answering my questions, it didn't seem you were phased by those. So overall, like the more softer skill side of things, you did well there. I thought that was pretty solid. Some of the clarifying questions were pretty good as well. There were important points. Some of the things that I said, and I kept saying it was quite deliberate to make you ask more of those questions. So some of them are rabbit holes, but I'll cover that a little bit in the next point. You mentioned what I loved was your summary as well before speaking of the working capital, like getting into that question. I thought you summarized that excellently because you covered more about, let's say if this was something that was ideal for you, felt like could get you to where you wanted to be, you framed it fully around what they were looking for. That I felt really helped me to rather than just go, oh, let's see what you guys do first type of thing. Although I did mention it, you framed the question so well where I was more open to talking about my situation, right, as far as what I could potentially afford and whatnot. So I thought that yeah, you framed that very well. When answering the range of pricing as well, I thought you did that pretty well. The main thing is how you often reply to that, which is really important. You answered that with calmness. That's crucial. And you did mention the range as well, and was not afraid to have that discussion about it. So that's the main thing because this is an adult conversation. It's serious, right? We're getting into their financial situation, and it's important we covered that. So as far as the qualification, right, I think that's what you got really well from me was like the financially, can I do it? The main thing is really looking at the other qualifiers, which is like, do I have a willingness to learn more and purchase? Which I think you did kind of get that from me. My willingness was definitely there and I was open to it. So, you didn't need to ask specific questions about that. Do I have the means? Of course, potentially, but you got something, right? That's always something you can note down for the closers about what I said, and then they can understand that up front and then work with them. So, I'd still put that person through quite happily.
Mhm.
Am I wanting to work to, getting to achieve, my goals? Like, am I wanting to get to work on a solution now? I think that kind of was the case. It's been obviously 2 years that I've been doing the same things for. So you kind of asked a bit of that why now question. So you got that there, which was good. Am I able to make a decision on my own to get started? That was probably the thing that you missed. That's the only
Mhm.
thing. But the other qualifications, I think you did those quite well.
Mhm.
So yeah, just kind of getting an understanding of that maybe in the situation phase of, oh, you mentioned being like a one-man band, but just so I understand, when it comes to, I guess, looking into new solutions, new areas of doing things, is that something that you tend to just look through by yourself, or do you tend to look to other important people in your life for advice on that? I would then just, it's like a soft qualification, but it just gives you a rough idea of their decision-making process. And most of the time for a one-man band, it's probably themselves, but you just want to hear that confirmation.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah.
good.
That's the one thing. But as far as like the things to improve, there was a few areas. Overall, it was a good call. It was a settable call. I'd have shown up. I'm absolutely sure. The biggest thing was at the start is not figuring out how much that I know about you. So I was
Okay.
asking more about what is it that you guys do. I was just at that point that's a hint into well how solution aware is this person,
Mhm.
right? So I would have asked at the start about any, Alicia said that you've kind of, gone for our resource that you opted in for. But is there anything more you know about us, or is this really the only stage that you know about us? Let me know just so I understand where your head's at with who we are. Right? Obviously, that's a long-winded way of saying it that I said off the cuff, but
Mhm.
you just want to get a gauge of how much they do know about us. Did they go through any resources that were sent and anything that they opted in for? And even just asking them about their thoughts, like so based on what you've seen from us so far and what you know about us, like what are your thoughts? Is there any questions? Like, you happy with everything there? Right. So that's just yeah, because you want to gauge that level of solution awareness. And then that will help you to know why they're potentially asking the questions of like, oh, can you tell me more about your program, where you're at, things like that. Because if they're totally cold and you have to manufacture more about us, then obviously that's what led to you at the end talking more about what James does. It was a little bit of the selling in there
Mhm.
that I saw at the end, and there was yeah, I totally understand why you did that because at the end of the day, you probably felt like there wasn't much that I knew about James, right? So
Yeah.
I would recommend getting a little bit of that up front, like how
Yeah.
much they know about it. So that's important. Um, and then yeah, as well, I think what was interesting was the clarifying question of like when I said about fighting fires, that was something that I wanted to see if you'd latch onto it, right? That is the type of thing where at the beginning of the call, that's something to put in your back pocket and wait for like the
Okay.
problem awareness phase, right? Because then
Yeah.
what happened is I started talking about many different things. I came up with so many different problems, and I could see you were getting lost in the situation, but you did pull it back. You got to the problem eventually, so you pulled it back very, very well. It's just about making it easier for you to navigate that conversation, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, so when you're hearing things, oh, I'm just fighting a lot of fires, doing this and that. Okay, keep disciplined, stick to what I'm looking for. So I think the next point to that would have been, okay, so you're mentioning quite a few things there, fighting fires included. I guess what would you say is the most important thing you're wanting to work on right now that may move the needle for you,
Mm.
right? Then you can get, I guess, the main area of conversation to cover, right? Because obviously, if the person gets into specifics and semantics, you can get pulled in so many different directions. If
Hmm.
someone does that, you zoom out, you look at the high level, and you go, right, well, this is a lot of stuff you've thrown at me here. What's the most important at this stage? Just so that I can, make this productive for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I think that would have helped you to make things a bit easier going through from situation to problem, right? Because I think through it we didn't. You found little problems, but you were probing on them a little bit, and it was like just there's a few little things, right, rather than one main thing that's important.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's kind of the overall part, and then figuring out how much they know about us. Those two areas, I would say.
Okay.
And then, yeah, another thing as well is like so when I asked about like the program, like the price and things like that, what you did well is you did mention like the game plan advisor, like a little bit, like they'll cover it. But the way I would frame it is, okay, so that's a perfectly valid question, and I would love to be the person to answer that in the absolute best way for you. The reason we have this call set up is more to see how things are, to see if it's even productive for you to be
Hmm.
connected with the next person, but the next person you're actually going to speak with potentially is the person that has all of the relevant information as far as knowing how to tailor the right support and advice to you. So I don't want
Hmm.
to be here making the wrong recommendations and you having the wrong expectations about what we can do, as they are the person to cover that with you.
Hmm.
Right. So it's kind of just putting a lot of authority on them as far as like knowing what advice to give and how to cover the support, rather than you having to feel like you need to tell them a little bit about James and a little bit about what we're doing, because that put you in that position,
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, it's just being able to acknowledge them for asking, the question as well, putting a bit of empathy in and saying, look, this is kind of the way we've set things up so that it's optimal for you as far as making that decision to work with someone. So that's kind of the way I'd frame it. But yeah, overall, those are the two main points I would say, was like figuring out what they know about us and then finding the one important needle moving problem that they want to solve.